time now to check in with the eNCA Money Desk, and Devin Murugan joins me now in studio. So, Devin, President Cyril Ramaphosa, I see that he's heard from his economic advisors around this major policy issue around basic income grant. He championed it for the first time, I heard, sometime last year. It was either at Human Rights Day or Freedom Day, one of those days, in his speech, the president saying that we will explore this. It seems the answer is back.
Yeah, and look, the president and the government is between a rock and a hard place here. I mean, on the one hand, you've got a desperate need of income support to millions of South Africans. On the other hand, you have a fiscus that simply is at its limits at the moment. We are struggling. So how do you reconcile that? And remember, we've got a budget coming up just in a couple of weeks' time. We haven't heard from the finance minister yet. We've got to see how that unfolds. But you're right, that advisory council has spoken to him. Here's the context. It's not affordable to dive into a permanent basic income grant. And this is according to a leaked copy of a note sent to the president by his advisory council. There has been mounting pressure, as we said, by civil society groups on President Ramaphosa and the Treasury to implement permanent income support for adults between the ages of 18 and 59. That's the big gap there as far as income support is concerned. The President's Advisory Council did recommend the extension of the rather temporary 350 Rand COVID-19 social relief distress grant, and that's beyond the month of March this year. But it's unclear how long that will last for. Let's bring in Professor Alex van den Heever from Wits University. He was part of a panel that was appointed by the Social Department, which released a report as well a few weeks ago. Professor, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. Presumably you have seen this leaked report. There are many warning flags here about what such a grant commitment can do to our coffers and financial stability. What's your take when you compare it with the report you handed in?
I think this report is unfortunate, and it is in many instances lacking in substance and largely represents an ideological position that sets itself against the very idea of income support for working age adults. And I think that that's an important point of departure, because when one raises issues of fiscal sustainability and economic risk, those aren't raised as part of an argument about feasibility. They're raised really to create an excuse not to implement this type of proposal ever. So I think that this is where we've got a major point of departure. Our report basically said this is an essential policy proposal that is superior to alternative proposals for dealing with poverty, income poverty in South Africa, and that it must be given priority in terms of financing. And under those conditions, South Africa's fiscal position is such that it would be sustainable. But what you see in the Economic Advisory Council report is a whole string of competing policies, all of which they're trying to allocate the resources towards. And these just happen to be the priorities of National Treasury and the Minister of Finance. And so that's really reflecting that particular prejudice. So I say that if the idea not to pursue the COVID social relief of distress grant past April happens, it will be a policy choice, not one that is determined by fiscal constraints, but because one doesn't believe in the very idea.
Well, that brings me to my next question, and then before we get to the continuation of that distress grant, the report does say, and I'm talking about the advisory committee report here, this idea that if we implement a grant to millions of people, that money will then filter back into the system and reach the coffers anyway. But this report says there's just simply no evidence that that would be the case. What do you make of it?
That's complete nonsense. We did extensive economic analysis on our evaluation using computable general equilibrium models, which allow for an evaluation of take into account the circular nature of the economy. So spending definitely results in both economic activity and a recovery of taxes on that spending. So you take that into account, and the residual might require tax financing. And when you look at the continuation of the COVID social relief or distress grant, the net financing requirement is considerably reduced. But I would also point out that we currently have many programs, tax giveaways in the South African fiscus that are directed to the highest income people in South Africa and have never been subjected to any kind of economic appraisal whatsoever. One example is 150 billion rand that is basically given to the top 10% of income earners in South Africa for retirement provision. That's 150 billion rand a year, and I've never seen an economic appraisal of that. Nobody is concerned about the risks associated with such a transfer, given other priorities in South Africa. So I'm just pointing out that when one wants to do an evaluation of the next most important priority in South Africa, it is important that that appraisals are done on all the key policies and not only the ones which involve a transfer to the poor.
All right, so that's the one end. And now let's just talk about what happens after the budget, all right? You enter March. Do you think, sustaining this current 350 Rand COVID distress grant beyond March, I mean, judging from what you just told me, I mean, is this practical? Is this financially possible? It's anyone's guess what would be said by the finance minister next month. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I can't say what he would say. I can say what the analysis suggests is that if we needed to raise an additional tax, we've proposed that we would consider, if it's necessary, you can introduce, for instance, a 1 percentage point increase in VAT, or you could introduce certain minor increments on personal income tax. That would be one, if you don't just look at the tax rebates that I've just mentioned. And if you had a 1 percentage point increase in VAT, you'd raise, and the recovery you'd get on VAT just on the grant itself, you'd have about 40 billion rand a year in recurrent spending that's available. So the question really is, what's the residual after that? And I think that what we're looking at are relatively minor adjustments to the overall tax system. In our view, the COVID SRD grant continuation is eminently affordable if you think that this is a policy worth doing. And I think that that is the key discussion. We think it is, and we had a lot of very accomplished analysts on our panel. I don't think that we have Social Security analysts or the equivalent economic experts on the Economic Advisory Council. They've taken a very cursory look at this issue and have given a very superficial response.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there because of time, but your point made quite clear there, Professor Alex van den Heever from Wits University. Before I hand over to the indicators, I mean, it's very interesting. This is a hot topic, the feasibility, the sustainability of this. And remember, Tillis, it's a politically hot subject, isn't it? It is a politically hot subject as well, Devin. The other issue is that until this point, when the advisors went back to the president about, the viability or otherwise of this basic income grant, it seemed to many observers that this may be a foregone conclusion, that it will be introduced. First, President Ramaphosa trumpeting it and also raising it after one of the ANC meetings, National Executive Committee meetings. It showed you that there was appetite for that conversation. Now you have this advice that goes against what we've thought was conventional wisdom. It becomes a tricky one for the president to handle in a situation where there's a gap for people aged between 18 and 59 who don't receive any other kind of income support, and with the levels of poverty that we face and unemployment that we face. Yep, we'll see how this unfolds, Tullis. Well, with that, let's take a very quick look to see what's happening on the markets. It's about 1/3% or more in the red.